Have you ever wondered if what you're feeling, or someone else is feeling for you, is really love, or just something else, something a bit more complicated and harder to pin down? Imagine this. You meet someone new, and suddenly their attention feels like air, everywhere, constant, unavoidable. At first, it's flattering. That message right after you wake up, the call that comes just when your thoughts start drifting away from them, it's like they're woven into the fabric of your day. But then, slowly, that warmth starts to feel less like affection and more like a chain tightening around your freedom. Is this love, or is it obsession in disguise? This question isn't just about romantic relationships. It's about how our minds sometimes confuse deep connection with compulsive need, a dance between desire and control that Carl Jung hinted at long ago when discussing the shadows we all carry inside us. Jung believed that beneath every feeling lies a complex interplay of conscious awareness and unconscious motivations. What if what feels like love is actually a reflection of someone's inner emptiness or unresolved wounds demanding to be filled through another person? That's where obsession sneaks in, masquerading as love but rooted in dependency and fear. I remember a story from a friend named Elena, a graphic designer living in Portland who thought she was madly in love with her boyfriend. At first glance, their relationship looked perfect. Texts every hour, spontaneous visits unannounced but always welcomed, or so she thought. One evening last winter, she sat alone in her apartment with the smell of burnt toast lingering from breakfast hours before, because yes, she got distracted, scrolling through messages again. It dawned on her that the love she felt was exhausting. Not because he was demanding but because she was losing herself trying to keep up with his needs. She realized then, this wasn't mutual affection, it was something else. Now let's pause here. Why does obsession look so much like love at the start? The answer lies partly in what Jung called projections. When we see qualities in others that actually belong to parts of ourselves we refuse to recognize. For example, if someone has an inner sense of incompleteness or fear of abandonment, they might project those feelings onto another person and cling desperately. Not because they truly know and accept them but because their own psyche craves reassurance through external fixation. So how do we tell the difference between real love and obsession disguised as affection? One clear sign is emotional dependency. The kind that makes someone feel unable to function without constant contact or approval from their partner. It's not just missing them or wanting them close, it's an almost physical ache when separated for even short periods. Think about Anna, a kindergarten teacher in Chicago who discovered this firsthand during the pandemic lockdowns in 2021. She told me over coffee how her boyfriend would repeatedly call her during work hours, not because he needed anything urgent but simply because the silence made him anxious and restless. Anna tried explaining boundaries gently at first but soon realized his need for contact wasn't about connection anymore, it was about control disguised as care. Here's where things get tricky. Obsession often feels like caring too much rather than too little, which can make it hard to notice until it escalates into unhealthy patterns. Jealousy masked as protectiveness or guilt-tripping disguised as concern. Now I'm not saying wanting closeness is bad or unnatural, we all crave connection. But there's a difference between sharing life with someone and being swallowed whole by their neediness without space for individuality. Let me offer something concrete here. A way to check your own feelings or observe those around you without getting lost in labels. Try this simple exercise. Next time you feel overwhelmed by someone's presence or attention, or even your own urge toward another, take a moment to ask yourself internally. Am I seeking connection because I cherish who this person truly is? Or am I trying to fill an emptiness within myself through their validation? Notice what comes up without judgment, just observe. If you find anxiety rising when not immediately connected or experience guilt when asserting boundaries, that's a red flag hinting at obsessive tendencies rather than healthy attachment. Elena tried this exercise after our conversation one chilly October afternoon while walking near Portland's waterfront under gray skies carrying coffee cups warm against her hands. She realized she often expected her boyfriend to validate her worth constantly instead of finding confidence within herself first, which explained why their relationship felt draining despite his kindness. What I find fascinating here, and maybe you will too, is how frequently people confuse obsession for love simply because society glorifies relentless passion as romantic idealism. We see movies where characters lose themselves entirely for true love, forgetting that real intimacy doesn't demand sacrifice of selfhood but rather invites mutual respect for each other's inner world. On the other hand, and here comes the irony, when someone tries to set limits on obsessive behaviors, they often face resistance framed as lack of love or not caring enough. That contradiction can deepen confusion and prolong unhealthy dynamics. But why would anyone fall into such patterns? Partly because early experiences shape how we relate emotionally later on, especially if childhood involved unpredictability or inconsistent caregiving. Jung pointed out that unresolved childhood wounds tend to replay themselves unconsciously through adult relationships until consciously addressed. This makes me think of Martin, an app developer living in Brooklyn who described growing up with parents who oscillated between distant coldness and intense criticism followed by sudden affection bursts that left him unsure what safety felt like. In his adult romantic life, he found himself obsessively seeking reassurance while fearing abandonment simultaneously, a classic push-pull dynamic born from early emotional confusion. So there's no shame here. Our psyches are wired to seek security even if sometimes we grasp at shadows mistaking them for light. To bring this closer home, next time you notice yourself or someone else clinging tightly, not out of pure joy but out of discomfort being apart, pause briefly and reflect on what drives those feelings beneath surface appearances. Here's another small practice you might try right now. Write down situations where you felt overwhelmed by either needing attention from others or giving it excessively until it drained you emotionally. Then ask yourself gently why those moments felt so urgent, and whether they were motivated by genuine connection or fear-based compulsion. It won't solve everything overnight, that would be too easy. But recognizing these patterns with kindness toward oneself is a crucial first step toward healthier relationships grounded not in obsession but true appreciation. And since we're diving deep today, if any part of this resonates with you so far, consider subscribing to the channel. There's much more coming that explores these subtle human experiences through honest stories mixed with psychological insight tailored for everyday life. I don't claim to have all answers here, but sharing these reflections feels important precisely because distinguishing between love and obsession can save us from cycles where emotions become traps instead of sources of growth. So let me leave you with a thought before moving on. Imagine two people standing side by side, not clinging so tightly they lose sight of themselves nor drifting apart disconnected, but balanced like partners dancing together naturally without stepping on each other's toes. That balance isn't magic. It requires understanding what feeds true affection versus what fuels addiction disguised as love. Ready to explore this further? Let's dive deeper next by looking closely at another crucial sign of obsession: the blurring boundaries where personal space disappears under pressure masked as devotion. Feel free to share your experiences below if anything here strikes a chord. You might be surprised how common these feelings are once given voice openly rather than tucked away behind smiles or excuses. And if you want some practical tools designed specifically for navigating these tricky emotional waters more confidently, that guide I mentioned earlier could be just what helps untangle those knots patiently waiting under layers of attachment patterns. Anyway, let's keep going into this maze together. There are layers yet unseen worth uncovering about ourselves and how we relate meaningfully beyond mere fixation. It's interesting how, once you start peeling back the layers of obsession disguised as love, the complexity just keeps unfolding. Let's talk about another key piece of this puzzle: the way obsession tends to blur boundaries, not just physical or spatial ones, but emotional and psychological boundaries too. This isn't just about invading personal space. It's when one person's identity starts to dissolve into the other's, making it impossible to tell where one ends and the other begins. Think about Neil, a freelance photographer in Austin who shared a story with me that perfectly illustrates this. He was involved with someone who insisted on knowing every detail of his day, not because she cared genuinely but because her anxiety skyrocketed if she didn't have constant updates. Neil found himself explaining mundane things like what he ate for lunch or which streets he drove down as if he were reporting from a mission. At first, he laughed it off. She's just curious, he thought. But gradually it felt suffocating, like his inner life was being laid bare without consent. This kind of boundary erosion can sneak up quietly and feel almost normal at first because it masquerades as concern or devotion. But underneath lies a deeper compulsion to control or possess rather than appreciate someone as a separate, whole individual. Why does this happen? It ties back to what Jung called the persona, the social mask we wear to fit into relationships and society while hiding parts of ourselves we consider unacceptable or vulnerable. When someone obsesses over another, they might be trying desperately to fix or complete their own fragmented persona by merging with the other person's world too closely. In practical terms, this means they lose respect for their own needs and limits, or disregard those of their partner, to maintain an illusion of connection. Here's a simple way to spot if blurred boundaries are at play in your relationship or experience. Ask yourself whether you, or someone else, frequently override personal preferences or silence internal discomfort just to keep peace or maintain closeness. Do you feel drained after interactions rather than refreshed? Is there pressure, explicit or not, to share every thought and feeling without pause? If so, you're likely witnessing boundary confusion rather than healthy intimacy. Now for an exercise that can help clarify where those boundaries lie for you personally. Take 10 minutes in a quiet space, maybe your bedroom or a peaceful park bench, and write down 3 situations recently where you felt uneasy about how much you shared or how much others expected from you emotionally. Next to each scenario, note what you wished had been different, maybe more space, more respect for your privacy, less pressure to respond immediately. This reflection isn't about blaming anyone but understanding your limits better so you can communicate them clearly moving forward. Neil tried this after our talk. He realized he'd been suppressing his discomfort because he didn't want conflict or to hurt feelings, but by ignoring his boundaries, the relationship lost its vitality and became an exhausting routine of explanations. Setting clear lines about what felt intrusive helped him reconnect with himself and eventually improved how he related with others too. Boundary setting isn't always easy. It takes practice and courage to say no without guilt, especially when obsession convinces us that any refusal equals rejection. But reclaiming your space is essential for genuine love where two people can coexist fully without smothering each other's individuality. Shifting gears now, let's explore yet another sign that obsession hides behind affection: an intense need for control disguised as protective behavior. This one is subtle because it often wears the face of care. Constant checking in, just in case, insisting on knowing whereabouts, for safety, even offering unsolicited advice framed as helpfulness. But underneath that protectiveness lies fear. A fear not just for the other person but also rooted deeply within oneself. Fear of losing control over something precious. Take Sophie's story from Brooklyn last summer. Sophie is a software engineer who dated someone who constantly monitored her social media activity under the guise of keeping tabs so nothing bad would happen. At first, she found it sweet. After all, wouldn't most people want their loved ones safe? But over time, these checks became invasive demands bordering on digital surveillance. She started feeling like an employee being audited rather than a partner being trusted. Sophie described how exhausting it was trying to navigate this tightrope between respecting his concerns and preserving her autonomy, and ultimately realized that this wasn't protection but control wielded through fear disguised as love. Control-driven obsession often shows up as jealousy too, where suspicion colors innocent interactions with friends or colleagues and leads to constant reassurance seeking that drains both parties emotionally. How do we distinguish healthy concern from controlling obsession? It boils down to intention and impact. Does your protective behavior empower the other person by respecting their independence? Or does it limit them through demands masked as care? If you find yourself, or observe someone, crossing lines under the cover of, for your own good, take a step back and reflect on whose fears are really being acted upon here. A practical exercise I suggest is mindfulness during moments when protective urges arise. Imagine you feel compelled to check up on someone repeatedly. Pause briefly and ask internally, is this coming from genuine care rooted in trust? Or am I acting from my own insecurities and desire for control? Pay attention without judgment. Over time, awareness itself can loosen grip these compulsions have on us by shining light on hidden motivations beneath surface behaviors. Sophie tried something similar using journaling combined with breathing exercises when tension flared during arguments about privacy boundaries. She learned not only to identify triggers but also developed tools for self-soothing instead of reacting impulsively, a crucial skill for breaking obsessive cycles dressed as protection. One fascinating twist here is how technology complicates these dynamics today. With instant messaging apps like WhatsApp or platforms like Instagram making constant contact easy but also enabling surveillance under digital veneers most previous generations never faced. That 24/7 connectedness often amplifies obsessive tendencies when misused, turning affection into chains harder to break. On a broader level though, not all attempts at caring come from unhealthy places. People genuinely want security for loved ones. But distinguishing support that fosters growth versus control requires honest self-examination rarely discussed openly enough outside therapy rooms. This leads me back to Jung's idea. Many such patterns stem from unintegrated parts within ourselves seeking resolution externally rather than inwardly facing our shadows with compassion and curiosity. The very work few dare tackle alone but which transforms relationships profoundly once begun sincerely. Before moving toward our final point today, and yes, there's more, I want you to try writing out moments when either you or someone else crossed lines between caring and controlling in past relationships or encounters. Even small incidents count. Then reflect quietly afterward on what feelings those moments evoked, noticing especially any frustration mixed with confusion about motives behind actions taken in name of love but feeling anything but loving on impact. This doesn't excuse behaviors nor label people permanently. Instead, it reveals complexities inside human bonds filled with contradictions needing gentle unraveling rather than quick fixes. I realize this all sounds heavy, and maybe even uncomfortable, because who wants to admit they sometimes act out of fear? But awareness here opens doors toward healthier patterns grounded not in obsessive clinging but conscious choice made daily anew based on respect for self first and then others naturally following suit. If any part resonates so far, know you're not alone navigating these tangled emotions amidst modern pressures amplified by technology hyperconnectivity. And there are tools out there helping untie those knots patiently waiting beneath appearances we often mistake for simple affection alone. And if diving deeper into understanding such nuanced emotional patterns interests you, I've got some material lined up exploring related themes about healthy detachment versus fixation that could support clearer insights whenever you're ready. For now though, it feels right bringing focus onto one more distinctive sign often overlooked yet profoundly telling when distinguishing obsession from authentic love. Unpredictable mood swings driven by emotional volatility tied directly into attachment insecurity rather than stable affection centered around mutual acceptance. And yes, I know what you're thinking. Great. Now emotions get even messier. But bear with me. Meet Carlos, a chef working at a bustling restaurant in Seattle who described dating someone whose moods shifted dramatically day to day depending on how secure they felt emotionally close, or far, from him. One moment she'd shower him with affection so intense he felt overwhelmed. Next day she'd withdraw suddenly leaving Carlos confused and anxious trying desperately to decode what had changed overnight without warning signs communicated clearly beforehand. This roller coaster wasn't random. It stemmed from underlying attachment wounds triggering highs and lows mimicking dependency cycles typical in obsessive relationships lacking stable foundations grounded in trust versus fear responses hijacking emotional regulation abilities momentarily unchecked. What makes mood swings such strong indicators? Because unlike steady love marked by consistent respect regardless of circumstance, in obsessive scenarios emotions fluctuate wildly reflecting internal chaos projected outward onto relationship dynamics causing confusion toxic enough over time that neither partner feels secure despite efforts invested endlessly attempting reconciliation. It gets worse when partners mirror these swings reciprocally creating feedback loops escalating instability instead fostering calm connection conducive toward growth. So how do we cope practically? Carlos began practicing emotional labeling. When caught off guard by sudden mood shifts either within himself or his partner he would pause silently noting internally, "Right now I'm feeling frustrated, confused, scared," naming emotions explicitly before reacting impulsively. As Jung might suggest acknowledging unconscious contents consciously diffuses their power gradually restoring some peace amid turmoil. Try this yourself next time emotions spike unexpectedly whether triggered by others' behavior or internal reactions. Slow down mentally name exactly what arises inside then breathe deeply before deciding any action allowing space between feeling impulse response reducing chances reactive mistakes feeding obsessive cycles perpetuating instability further. Over weeks, Carlos noticed greater patience developing alongside clearer communication, improving mutual understanding, helping relationships stabilize incrementally despite inherent challenges present since beginning. The trick here isn't perfection. Spoiler alert. None exists. But commitment toward awareness coupled with compassion, both self-directed and extended outward, allowing messy human realities coexist authentically beyond black and white judgments trapping us unnecessarily. Now, if that all feels overwhelming, or maybe sparks curiosity, I invite reflection. Have you experienced times when feelings switched, suddenly pushing you toward clinginess one moment followed by withdrawal next, leaving confusion about true intentions behind actions performed supposedly out of love? Jung emphasized individuals must confront such inner contradictions honestly, learning tolerance toward paradoxes within themselves, enabling richer relational experiences less dictated by unconscious fears masquerading as devotion. If this strikes home somehow, drop a comment sharing what surprised or challenged your perspective today. These conversations matter precisely because emotional authenticity rarely gets spotlighted candidly amid cultural myths glorifying drama mistaken for passion. And while I'm here mentioning curiosity, it reminded me how oddly satisfying it is sometimes thinking through all these tangled human behaviors, compared almost humorously like decoding complex puzzles nobody handed instructions for. Except maybe life itself writes them page after page, requiring this willingness keep reading despite occasional detours filling narratives uniquely ours. Anyway, with those reflections brewing, let's hold onto them gently for now while preparing mindsets open enough forthcoming discussion, getting closer still toward unpacking other subtle yet critical signals betraying obsession beneath facades called love. Ready? Because what comes next will challenge assumptions further, urging us to differentiate attachment rooted in genuine appreciation versus compulsions demanding endless reassurance, twisting hearts into knots harder undo than tangled earbuds forgotten pockets. Stick around if this resonates, and consider subscribing if not done yet. We're building something thoughtful here, worth growing together, step by step, unpacking mysteries real human connections carry beneath surface appearances. There's one more layer we haven't touched yet, and it often hides in plain sight. The way obsession can distort perception of reality itself, turning ordinary interactions into an all-consuming narrative where every glance, word, or silence is loaded with exaggerated meaning. This isn't just about jealousy or mood swings. It's when your mind becomes a storyteller that insists on seeing patterns and signs everywhere, often negative or catastrophic, fueling anxiety and fixation. I recall Sarah's story vividly. She's a nurse from Toronto who found herself trapped in this spiral with her partner during the turbulent year of 2023. At first, small misunderstandings, like a delayed reply to a message or a forgotten plan, felt normal. But gradually, those moments morphed into catastrophes in her mind. He must be losing interest, she'd think. Or, maybe he's hiding something from me. Her thoughts ran wild, and she began obsessively checking his phone and rereading conversations, trying to decode hidden meanings. What's fascinating, and painful, is how this mental distortion feeds obsession by creating a feedback loop. The more you look for signs of rejection or betrayal, the more you find, or imagine, you do, which then intensifies fear and need for reassurance. It's like your mind is stuck in a hall of mirrors reflecting distorted images of what's actually happening. This phenomenon ties back to Jung's concept of complexes, emotionally charged groups of ideas that unconsciously shape our perceptions and reactions without us realizing. When someone harbors a fear complex related to abandonment or worthiness, everyday events can trigger intense emotional responses disproportionate to reality. So how can someone caught in this pattern begin to untangle themselves? Here's an exercise Sarah found invaluable. Keep a daily log for 1 week, noting moments when you experience overwhelming interpretations of others' actions. Write down what actually happened versus what thoughts and feelings arose afterward. Then ask yourself calmly, is there solid evidence supporting this interpretation? Or am I filling gaps with fears or assumptions? This practice encourages stepping back from automatic mental narratives to see things more clearly without getting swept away by them. Sarah described how initially she doubted she could change such ingrained thought habits, but sticking with this exercise slowly weakened compulsive worries, allowing her to approach her relationship with renewed perspective rather than suspicion. Now pause here because this final piece connects deeply with everything else we've explored today. Love isn't about control, erasing boundaries. emotional roller coasters, or compulsive narratives. It's about presence grounded in reality and mutual respect. Obsession twists these foundations until they become distorted reflections best recognized through self-awareness gently cultivated over time. Imagine you're watching a movie where every plot twist seems designed to provoke panic instead of understanding. That's how obsession plays tricks on perception. But learning to question those stories within our minds opens space for more balanced emotions rooted in truth rather than fear. And that leads me naturally towards something important I want you to feel as we wrap up. Transformation isn't about becoming perfect or never struggling with attachment again. It's about growing awareness enough so that moments of discomfort become opportunities rather than traps. Think back on Elena in Portland wrestling with exhaustion from constant validation seeking. Neil navigating boundary erosion. Sophie confronting control disguised as care. Carlos managing emotional volatility. And Sarah dismantling mental distortion. All different faces showing how obsession wears many masks but always invites us toward deeper self-knowledge when faced honestly. What if instead of fearing those uncomfortable feelings we leaned into them curiously? What if each anxious urge was seen as a messenger bringing insight into parts of ourselves starved for attention or healing? That kind of shift doesn't happen overnight. Much like learning any new skill, it takes patience combined with kindness toward oneself amid inevitable setbacks. Yet it also opens doors not only to healthier relationships but richer connections grounded in authenticity rather than fixation. You might be thinking, okay, great, but what does this really mean for me in my daily life? Here's the thing. Understanding these patterns means you gain tools to notice when your heart is being led astray by past wounds replaying through obsession rather than genuine affection. That awareness becomes your compass steering toward choices nourishing freedom instead of dependence. And freedom here isn't loneliness. It's the space where true love can breathe because it respects individuality while inviting closeness. A delicate balance reflecting maturity over impulse. In practical terms, that might look like holding conversations where boundaries are honored without defensiveness. Allowing space for silence without jumping to conclusions. Recognizing triggers inside yourself without judgment so they lose power faster. Embracing vulnerability without confusing it with neediness. It might feel risky at times, to face fears we usually avoid, but recall Jung insisted real growth begins when unconscious shadows step into light willingly rather than lurking behind curtains shaping us secretly. Relationships become laboratories where these inner dynamics play out visibly, and having courage to experiment differently can break cycles perpetuating suffering disguised as passion. So here's an invitation before we part ways today. Next time you feel caught between longing and anxiety, control and withdrawal, pay gentle attention. Not to suppress but to understand these impulses' roots better. Let curiosity replace blame. Watch without rushing toward fixes. See what surfaces beneath the surface dramas playing out externally. In doing so, you're practicing what Jung described as integration, the conscious acceptance of all parts within us leading toward wholeness, not fragmentation. It means accepting that love is messy precisely because humans are messy. Not neat stories scripted perfectly but lived experiences full of contradictions, asking us simply, how do you want to relate now? And that question itself holds tremendous power because it invites choice where before there was only reactive habit. If there's one takeaway I hope stays with you beyond today's talk, it is this. Real love flourishes not when we clutch desperately but when we loosen grip enough to hold space for both ourselves and another person fully. With all imperfections visible yet accepted lovingly anyway. Because paradoxically letting go becomes the most profound way of holding on, not through possession but presence free from chains imagined inside minds craving certainty at all costs. That feels like closing a door on confusion without slamming it shut but gently easing open new possibilities, waiting patiently behind hesitations shaped by past wounds healed through conscious effort rather than avoidance. Before I let you go, remember nobody masters these dynamics perfectly, and frankly that would be boring. We stumble forward imperfectly each day, creating new narratives, weaving threads stronger than fear alone ever could. If any part of today stirred something inside you, be it discomfort or hope, I'd love if you shared your thoughts below. Our stories connect us beyond isolation, reminding each other we're human after all, wrestling endlessly yet bravely with love disguised sometimes as obsession. And since we've come this far together, I want to mention there are resources available diving deeper into mindful relationship skills designed practically for navigating these complexities beyond theory alone whenever you're ready. For now though, I'll leave you with this thought echoing softly yet persistently beyond words. Love isn't found by chasing shadows nor trapped inside mirrors reflecting distorted fears. Love emerges gently when we learn finally how to see clearly, hold lightly, and choose freely what kindles warmth without burning whole. Thank you for spending this time exploring such tender terrain alongside me. May your path forward unfold with courage woven through compassion, one imperfect step at a time.